Hey y'all, Austin Kleon here. I am absolutely delighted this afternoon to have Sarah Ruhl with me. She is a renowned, celebrated playwright and the author of several books. Um, the one we're going to talk most about today is her new memoir called Smile, the Story of a Face, about her Bell's palsy after a pregnancy. And it's much more than that, though. Sorry, Sarah, to sound
No,
reductive.
no,
I'm
it's
like failing already.
yeah,
Sarah is able to write. She writes about, for me, these books. So I'm in love with this book. I love this book. The book that brought me to you, though, is this book
yeah.
called 100 Essays I Don't Have Time to Write, which is an essay collection of very short essays. And what both of these books do is one of my favorite things is you're able to write about the kind of wholeness of your life, your domestic life, your motherhood, and your creative work. And they intertwine in these really beautiful ways in these books. And so I'm in love with these books. I wanted to do this for the book club. But then I got a hold of this last year and I said, oh, this will be perfect. And I wanted to just read to you real quick, if I could, before we get started. I just want to read you some of the comments that our book club readers have said about Smile. This book holds my soul.
Oh,
Without a doubt, my favorite book of the club so far.
no,
Next,
thank
Sarah
you.
Ruhl is the kind of unpretentious, honest grown up I aspire to be one day. This is a beautiful, serious book with a warm and open heart.
Mm.
And finally, I'm going to read one more. A rare read that is worth devouring twice and savoring over a lifetime.
Oh,
Truly remarkable. These
oh,
were unsolicited comments
that's
from the readers.
incredibly
So
nice. God, thank you so much.
to puff you up before I get to my questions. So thank you. It's so good to see you, and thank you for doing this. I think
Delight.
the first question I wanted to ask you is, do you ever feel like you're gonna love a book just from the epigraphs?
Yeah.
Because I when I open your books, it's like I see in 100 things I can't, like, I'm I see this like range of people. I made a list of all of the people in several of your books. I'm like failing here with my notes, but I'm like, it's like Frank O'Hara, Lewis Hyde, Tilly Olson, Virginia Woolf, Thich Nhat Hanh. It's like I wanted to ask you, what is your reading life like? Where do these epigraphs come from? And by the way, folks, epigraphs is the little quotes in the beginning of a book or at the top of a chapter in a book. When do you choose them? Like, at what point in the writing process do these epigraphs come? Do they come at like the beginning and the book kind of forms around them, or do they come midstream or at the end? Or like when do these things kind of like pop up for you? When do you choose them?
It's such an interesting question. I think they come for me later in the process, like I would say three-fourths of the way through. Do you know that point in the writing process where you're over a certain hump and you've convinced yourself that yes, in fact, it is a book?
It's going to happen. You've
Yeah,
gone through the dark night of the soul where you're like, what am I even doing? And you've come up and you're like, okay, I can see the end of this.
yeah.
That's
Like,
how I
yes, in
feel.
fact, it's a play. Yes, in fact, it's a book. Even though I went through that wonky phase two-thirds of the way through where it was scary. I think that's when other writers and the way they crystallize things kind of come to me and feel like they're friends with the book. Um, you know how sometimes you go to a movie theater and there's you're in the previews and there's some previews that you think, oh, I hope this preview is not friends with my movie. This feels like the wrong movie theater. Or other times
Right.
you're like, oh, I'm glad these previews are friends with my movie, the one I'm about to see. So I do think of it as kind of being in fellowship with these other minds.
Because you're using other people's words to start your book.
Right.
So it's like they have to evoke, or they have to like they're almost like a trailer. I never thought of that before. They're like leading in.
They're like a little, a little clearing of the throat with the ancestors, helping you clear your throat. And one thing I love about your work is how trusting of that web of lineage you are. How trusting you are of we're not we're not Athena's coming out of the head of Zeus. I mean, even Athena
Yeah,
came from somewhere. We're all
right.
coming from somewhere. We're all part of this giant compost heap that is literature.
Well, I'm glad you brought up lineage. You're getting to my questions for me because I love that word and I wish I had used it more. Philip Glass uses that word a lot. He says
Mhm,
I don't really worry about influence or anything like that. I think of lineage.
mhm.
Who do you feel? So I I don't want to jump, but like one of the things I think the thing that really resonates for me, I art and family has always been like the one of my great obsessions. I got married really young, right out of college, and I felt like I was really really lucky in that I had these really role models, these, and they happened to be men at the time, these guys who were obviously dedicated to their family but also like very dedicated to their craft too. So like people like George Saunders or like
Mhm.
Tobias Wolff and that kind of thing. Now what's really interesting is once I became a dad, I had to look to mothers because
Mm,
I felt like it was mother artists that were really the ones that were speaking to me as far as that the art and family thing. So I wanted to
mhm.
ask you, and this might tie in with the lineage question, who are your role models? Starting, do you just are able to you just write with such beauty about the intertwining of art and domesticity, the
Mm.
intertwining of the craft and family, and there's a wholeness to your books, the kind of portrait of a whole life. I want to
Mm.
ask you, like, who are your role? Do you have role models, like when you got started, like people who you looked up to? Um,
It's such a beautiful way of putting it, so thank you. And also, I apologize if there's buzzing noise. Like I'm in Brooklyn, it was so quiet when we started, and now there's this sound like meh.
yeah,
Um, I I mean, it's interesting that I remember when My Struggle came out, detailing domesticity and fatherhood. And I was a little bit like, oh, come on, now it's cool. Like now that men are having babies, like now you can kvetch about the whole struggle of it
right,
all. But I think Tilly Olson's essay was one of the first ones I read in Silences, where she
yeah,
talked about ironing while thinking and while writing and the spaces in between. And Alice Walker writes beautifully about that. Um, and I think my own mother, in some ways is a role model for me because she's an actress and she would bring me to the theater when I was little and I would grow up not seeing a huge division between her artistic life and her love of her family. It all seemed bound in the sense of play that she has as a person. Um, Another huge role model for me is Paula Vogel, who is also my teacher. And I see with her how when she teaches playwriting, she's also modeling a life in writing, which is so extraordinary to have those models. And I think, with all of my teachers, I think of their writing meaning as much to me as their teaching, meaning as much to me as how I see them modeling a life. And you brought up Philip Glass, and it's interesting that he uses the word lineage because I think he's also a Tibetan Buddhist. So lineage is a word that people use there, to talk about their teacher and their teacher's teacher and their teacher's
yeah.
teacher.
Well, you jumped me again because so that's the other thing I wanted to ask you about. I love this. There's one of my favorite things ever written about being a parent is in 100 things or 100 essays, and you might know what I'm flipping through. It's right in the beginning on interruptions,
Yeah.
and you say there were times when it felt as though my children were annihilating me. And finally, I came to the thought, all right, then, annihilate me. That other self was a fiction, anyhow. And then I could breathe. I could investigate the pauses. Wendell Berry there's a part in one of his documentaries, I think it's Look and See, about him and his work, where he says it's the interruption that actually gives the art meaning. He talks about how actually it's the life that gives the art meaning. It's not, and so I wanted to ask you, the thing that's interesting about Wendell Berry is that he has a deep spiritual life. And I detect a very deep spiritual thread that works through your books. So I actually want to ask you what kind of spiritual background you have, and whether you have a practice now, or if you're comfortable talking about that.
Sure. I love Wendell Berry, first of all. And I was raised Catholic. I talk a little bit in the book about my sort of abandoning Catholicism at an early age. I wasn't sure about confirmation. I wasn't ready. And then spent a while kind of pivoting between ideas of spirituality and agnosticism, and then landed on Tibetan Buddhism in my late 30s, I guess. And I came to it in sort of a surprising way, which was that our babysitter is Tibetan, and she's a Tibetan Buddhist. And I really watched how she lived and how she was, and what her practices were. And I thought, oh, if someone can be this kind and happy and helpful all the time, I want to be like that. I
want some of that.
I want some of that. Yeah.
I want some of that. So this is a really interesting point. So my dad and I, my dad's sort of a kind of born again evangelical, and I'm more. I don't know right now what's going on with me. I believe I'm very interested in the verbs of religion. I'm very interested in prayer. I'm very interested in the practices of religion. And something that I always find weird about evangelical Christians is that they're always talking about witnessing, as if they have to tell you what's going on. And the thing I'm always telling my dad is, I'm like, the people I know, for example, I have a lot of friends who are really deep intellectuals, but also Christians. And it's really their way of being that I'm like, I want some of that. It's not what they say. It's not them trying to convert me or anything. It's like, I want some of what they are having. I'll have what she's having, right?
Yeah, I want what she's having. Yeah, exactly.
And so I love that. I mean, and I'm just really fascinated by this idea of witnessing, because they act like it's I love what you say about being a playwright is like being how do you put it? It's an observer. What do you say? It's perpetual observer? What were the words that you used?
In the back. I mean, first of all, you're alone when you're writing, and then when you're in rehearsal, you sit in the back and you watch and you take notes. So you really are
eternal observer, is what you said.
Your first audience. You're writing for yourself as audience. It really is an observer role, and I like the idea of witnessing. It's interesting. I don't know much about what that comprises in evangelical traditions, but art is a kind of witnessing too.
I'm just struck by how many of the writers I looked up to have some sort of religious background. And it seems like writing becomes their spiritual practice. But then if you read like Ernest Becker's Denial of Death, he's always like, it's not enough. Sometimes they go beyond, and there's like, they have to come back to that some sort of spiritual practice. And I feel very much that I'm in that zone now, where it's like, I grew up with this very, this deep faith tradition around me. And then I replaced it with writing and art.
Yes.
And now it's like, now I'm looking for the bigger service, like, what is this work in service of? Do you ever feel about your work that way? Do you ever think about service at all? Or, because I feel like it's almost there, and you're right. Like, I don't know. What do you think?
I do think about it. And I remember we had a Tibetan Lama or teacher visit when we were doing this play, The Oldest Boy at Lincoln Center. And he was talking about art, and he said, art and religion aren't very different. And then he started laughing, and he was like, and someone has to do it.
Yeah, somebody's
We
got to
were
do.
sort of implying that they were both kind of a certain kind of service to the invisible world.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and I think I forget who said this, if it was Carl Jung or somebody, but I feel like that really resonates with me, the idea that theater or writing or art can be your spiritual bread or what have you until you hit middle age. And then it's a
yeah,
little bit like, I need something more, you
yeah.
know. It's there's a solipsism one wants to avoid as one gets older, I think.
I That's beautiful, and I right there. I was actually it was funny rereading your book because I just read William James, The Varieties of Religious
Uh-huh.
Experience, and right before that I read Ernest Becker's Denial of Death, and those two together, it's like, okay, well, this I got it now, I think,
Mhm.
you know. So I was just thinking so much about that when I was looking back through your books. I want to get back to your work though. Um, there's I feel like with the isn't it so fascinating how books written before the pandemic are speaking, because we
Mhm.
speak there
Yeah,
it's just always whatever context you're in,
yeah,
new meanings come up through the text.
yeah.
One of the things I've been thinking a lot about, I am very stupid about plays and theater, so I'm going to ask you some more about theater later on. But one of the things I grew up with are these adventure games where you'd have these little dialogue. Do you remember these? Where it's like you'd have y- like you'd be in an adventure game, you'd meet a character, and then there was a list of dialogue that you could choose from, and whatever you clicked on the dialogue, that would influence how the conversation went, and then that's how you would get the characters to do things for you. So,
Uh-huh.
so I'm like very interested in like dialogue webs and dialogue as a way that conversations unfold. And I feel like one of the things that's happened in the pandemic is we've sort of lost like our social skills, like just what you say to people. And there's a beautiful part of your book where I think so many people are grieving in multiple ways right now. And there's a beautiful part in Smile where you're talking about people who say, well, I just can't imagine what you're
Mhm.
going through.
Yeah,
And I'm like, well, damn it, try.
yeah.
Which is one of the reasons I like to say I can only imagine.
Mhm,
And you
mhm.
talk about the difference between I can only imagine versus, I can't imagine. I was going to ask you, do you have any other conversational shortcuts like that you like to
Mhm.
use as a writer? Like one of my favorites is when we came on, I didn't ask you how you were. I said, it's so nice to see you.
Mm.
Because I think asking people how they are right now is very like I don't like to start that way
Can of
because
worms.
if I'm going to be honest, I'd be like, not great, Bob. Yeah.
Well, I think it's funny. I teach at Yale, and I was doing a weekly check-in with my students one week. I said sort of, how are you? And one of my students said, like, do you really want to know? Are you really
Right.
asking? Like, are you my therapist right now? Do you want to know? And I said, yes, I want to know. Of course I want to know.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I think my children would be delighted if someone didn't ask them how they were because they hate small talk so
Yeah.
desperately. And I wonder if they're just introverts or if the pandemic also had an effect. Um, but yeah, this thing of I can only imagine versus I can't imagine, or oh, I totally get what you're going through because da 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 da. That was brought home to me by a friend who was as a theater colleague, and she'd lost her granddaughter who was a baby. And she said she was really sick of bumping into people in the grocery store and sort of really not wanting to know, saying, oh, I can't imagine what you're going through. I mean, it's funny, even when I say that phrase, I look down and I look away. I can't imagine.
Yeah.
It's like I don't really want to know. As opposed
Yeah.
to you can only imagine, it makes you want to sit forward and make eye contact and try to imagine. And I do think there's a moral imperative right now to try to imagine what other people are going through because we're so siloed, we're so atomized. This country is so breaking apart. We have to try to imagine.
I want to ask you about your own imagination and when you see a play, well, I see what I just did there. When a play is coming together, or a poem, or a book, do you see things in your head, or do you hear things, or is it
Mm.
both?
It's funny. I feel like it's sort of one or the other. Sometimes it's an image. Like I have this play, Dead Man's Cell Phone, where I remember seeing the image so clearly of this dead man with his head on the table in a cafe and his phone just ringing and ringing and ringing. But sometimes it's a little fragment of conversation, and so I hear the voicing of it first. I don't think I usually hear both. It's
Interesting.
like you're lucky as an artist if you get one little thing.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
one line came to me today that felt like it could be the first line of something.
Ooh,
But you're lucky if you get an image
yeah.
or a voicing.
So what do you do when you have that line, other than, do you write it down? Where do you write it? Where do you put it? Where do you put that
I
line? Or do you
I
keep it in your head?
pathetically and anti-romantically, I put it on my sticky notes on my phone because,
Oh,
it's like
yeah.
I'm a cyborg. I always have my phone with me. So I wish I could say I put it on a magic notebook, but
You've given me, I would love to just be able to, wouldn't you love to just see the notes files in everyone's phone, like the writers, you know? I
yeah.
remember the first person I heard say that they were writing in the notes app was Patricia Lockwood. And if you've
Mhm,
read any of her stuff,
mhm.
it's funny. Mike Judge, the creator of like Beavis and Butthead and those, he's a Texas guy.
Uh-huh,
He told me one time, this was a Q&A, I couldn't believe this. He said the voices come first. That
uh-huh.
he hears his characters first, and then he like doodles them in the sketchbook. I thought that was
Interesting.
amazing because they're so like, I think of Beavis and Butthead, for example, is like so.
So
But
visual.
I'm obsessed with this question right now because my wife has aphantasia. Have you ever heard of this?
What is that?
That is the inability to see pictures in your mind's eye.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
very rare.
Huh,
It's kind of a new thing that it's not a new thing. What it is that I can't imagine most people, when they find out that they have it, they're like, "Wait a minute, I thought you were speaking metaphorically when you said picture this." So Megan, like, literally, and it's funny because she went to architecture school. But she can't
amazing.
make, yeah, so she can't make pictures in her mind, really. She
Huh,
has to think. So she almost like, some people with aphantasia say that they think in radio,
huh,
almost like it's a radio going. And
huh.
it's been a very interesting thing in our marriage to work
What
out.
is
So
that?
I'm so that's why I'm asking people, like, when you
Mhm.
have these ideas, what do they come as images? Do they come
Right.
as sounds?
Can she
Uh
dream in pictures?
I don't, I haven't asked her that. I or I did ask her, and I forget what her answer was, but I'm gonna ask
Mhm.
her later. I'll let you know what she says.
Yeah, I'd be
But
curious.
it's changed my whole opinion of imagination, because I used to be, I'm kind of a visual guy
Yeah.
anyway. And so I was always of the Dave Hickey, the art critic, said, imagination's when you close your eyes and think of a door, picture a
Uh-huh.
door or whatever. And I'm like, actually, now imagination is this whole like richer, much, there's a lot of different ways to use it. Like Ed Catmull, who co-founded Pixar, has aphantasia
Huh.
too.
So interesting. In a way, it's like you have to draw it out. Like it
Yes.
would be even more compelling to draw it out if
We
you
do
could.
Wordles as a
Yeah.
family, though,
Mhm.
and she has to actually, I found out now why she hates Scrabble, because she can't imagine the tiles. She has to actually like move the tiles
It
around.
irritates me about Wordle that you can't write it out in that way.
Yeah.
It's, you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Um,
You can't try a thing out.
yeah, you can type it out, but
Yeah.
then you have to like backspace. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, that's our new in our family, is just, I think that's one thing I love about having a family, is that you just have these, like, and I don't know if you feel this way. I mean, you just have these, they came to you. They're your gang, but they're just mysterious. Everyone's just so mysterious all the time. Even, do you feel that way? I like, who are these people?
I do, and I know that it's like Esther Perel, that love lady,
Yeah.
thinks that's great for a marriage, to
Yeah.
keep that mystery alive, and how amazing that my husband can still be opaque to me after all these years, and I wonder what he's thinking. I'm desperate to know what he's thinking at certain
I
moments.
agree. It keeps it interesting for
Yeah.
sure. So I wanted to. So I'm like, I have so many things I want to ask. I want to ask you about asymmetry,
Mm.
because the line that everyone loves in this book is imperfection is a portal. I have been thinking about this a lot, and let me tell you what I connected it to with my own reading. Have you ever read anything about Pasteur, the like Louis Pasteur, his
Not a whole
idea
lot.
of okay,
No.
so his idea is that there's cosmic asymmetry,
Mm.
that the whole universe exists because of asymmetry. And he calls it a cosmic asymmetry. It's the imbalance between matter and antimatter
I'm
in
writing this
physics.
down.
And I feel really stupid, because what if it isn't Louis Pasteur? What if it's
Well,
another Pasteur? There is a
it's
Pasteur that in
yeah.
physics, this idea that the whole universe actually comes from asymmetry.
Huh.
The way I came to that is there's a guy named Ian McGilchrist who wrote this book called The Master and His Emissary, and it's about brain hemisphere difference. And he makes the great point that even though the brain is divided, it's not a symmetrical organ, that it's actually asymmetrical, and that the different hemispheres have different ways of attending to the world. The way I've sort of like, I feel like the asymmetry and the imperfection is a portal. To me, I feel like it's when you're able to be imperfect in your work or even in your everyday life, it gives people an opening. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit more about this idea that imperfection is a portal?
Well, I think there's something really static about symmetrical beauty. Even on a canvas compositionally, it's more interesting if there's like a little yellow blob in the corner
Yeah.
that you didn't expect. There's a way in, there's an entry point. Um, my daughter, for example, my 12-year-old is really a perfectionist. And I think it's hard. It creates an aloofness. I mean, I think she has a real fear of messiness and imperfection, and which is a way of letting other people into
Yeah.
the picture, into the frame. Um, and I think I never really thought that much about facial beauty. Before getting Bell's palsy, it wasn't really on my docket of things I was that interested in, frankly. Like I was more interested in the interior life. But there's nothing like becoming profoundly asymmetrical to make you think about it. And I was reading even, about Islamic architecture, that asymmetry was a big part of, how you let the spirit into the building or out of the building. That like when you symmetry sort of closes the gate in a funny way. And
Yeah.
these little wabi-sabi portals, let the spirit world in or out.
What do you tell your daughter? What's your advice to your daughter about the perfectionism? Do you have any? I mean, I don't try to teach my kids anything, so
I mean, I just try to remind her all the time. She's like, she loves baking, but she gets really mad when it doesn't look perfect. And I'm like, but it tastes good.
right.
That things can look imperfect, but taste delicious. And I think it's, again, this Instagrammable culture we live in, this very visual culture of surface and perfect surfaces that are driving, young girls crazy and bananas. This idea that we're projecting a perfect image as opposed to thinking of like, well, what tastes good? What's my inner experience of what tastes good in my life?
Um, while we're talking about your kids, so I wanted to. It's William. William's the your boy,
Yes.
one of the twins. Can you tell me what William said that one time about it's beautiful, but I don't like it?
Yeah, he was pretty little, and I took him to some piece of art. I forget what. And I was like, "Did you like?" He's like, "It's beautiful." Like he felt like objectively it was beautiful, beautiful, but I don't like it.
Well, I'm gonna send William an inscribed copy, and maybe one day he'll think this is cool. So there's a page in Keep Going that was somewhat inspired by William.
Oh my god, I love.
Potential potential reactions. This is good,
Mhm.
but I don't like it. Or
Mhm.
this is good, I like it. This uh
Yeah.
actually, it was Auden actually Auden had this rubric of, it's like, okay, I know this is a masterpiece and I like it, or I know this is a masterpiece but I don't like it. I know
Yeah.
this is trash but I love it.
Yeah.
I know this is
Yeah.
trash and I don't like it. These layers of
Yeah.
reaction. But I thought, you have to tell William thank
Oh
you,
my God, he'll be
because
so pleased.
he inspired that page. Because I remember, and I wanted to ask you, I have two questions. A lot of my readers right now and people in the club are trying to figure out how to balance their art and their family life. And so I have two questions for you about that. The first question is actually maybe the more mundane question, which is, do you have any advice for people who are trying to figure out that I mean, it's a huge question, but do you have any advice for people who are struggling to balance their kind of artistic aspirations with their, family life, or what they think are obligations? Is there
Mhm.
any wisdom that you have to share, or are you like me, you're a perpetual amateur and have no idea?
I mean, I'm sure a perpetual amateur, but I will say for people with young children, one piece of advice is it really changes when they go to kindergarten, except post-pandemic, that is. Like, you really do
Yeah,
have 9 to 3, things change, so that 5-year period can seem endless when you're an artist, but it really does come. And I think also that micro writing I can find so useful, and like just like the Times has a 7-minute workout for exercising,
yep,
you can write for 2 minutes literally, and everyone has 2 minutes a day. You could write for seven
yeah.
minutes and put the clock on, and something interesting is bound to come.
I knew you'd have a good answer, so thank you. I have been telling people, what's the one-armed miniature version of what you could do?
Mhm,
Because I remember reading about John Darnielle, the Mountain Goats songwriter, how he used to rock his kiddo and work
mm,
things out on the piano. But
mhm,
I've also loved Ursula K. Le Guin, who was just like,
mhm,
look, babies eat books, but they
mhm.
spit them out, and you can take the pieces later and put them back together again. So that's like my favorite,
I love
But
that.
again, it has to. There's something about that from a mother that I
Mhm,
think has this. For me, it's an authority, that comes
mhm.
from. I don't know. I just want to hear from others. The other thing I wanted to ask you, and I know this is too big of a question. What have your children taught you about like creative work?
Mhm,
Because you mentioned before your mom and her sense of play. I think
mhm,
people forget that about plays, is that they're literally, it's play.
mhm.
We're playing. So is there anything that you feel like is there anything you've gotten from your kids that you feel like, I mean, again, this is just an absurd question, but is there anything that your kids have taught you that really pops out to mind about your own creative work?
I listen to all of their feedback. I love their feedback, and I do think any play worth its salt should be interesting to, like, a 7-year-old. There should be enough either story or spectacle that a 7-year-old is like, "Oh, that's interesting." Um, recently, I shared an opera libretto I'm working on with the kids and had them read all the parts, which was really funny, and they had some good thoughts. But one thing they say consistently, which I find hilarious, is they're just like, "Your plays are too much about love and death, mom. Like, could you get another theme?"
Kids, I got bad news for you.
The whole kettle of fish.
um that's I didn't even get to ask you much about theater. If I have a feeling that some of the readers, and I know we have to wrap up here. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, yeah,
This has
yeah.
just been so much fun for me. Um,
Likewise.
these books, I mean, I think these speak to a very broad audience, but I wanted to ask, or at least they do to me. I wanted to ask you if there are people like me who don't feel like they understand theater, or they aren't like super familiar with theater. I noticed like and I wanted to encourage people, your plays, actually I looked up on my library site. A lot of your plays are available on as you can read them.
Uh-huh.
And so I wanted to ask you, is it weird to have people read your plays? How would you prefer them? Like, I know that your play about Dear Elizabeth, which is the letters between why is my
Robert
brain?
Lowell and Elizabeth Bishop. Yeah.
So that's available as like an audiobook that you can
Yeah.
listen to, which I think is kind of cool. If you had an entry, a gateway drug for people to get into your theater work, other than we go to Manhattan and see one of your plays, or where, what would you suggest to readers who are curious, who want to dip into some of your plays?
Well,
Do
first
you
of
think
all,
there's a good, sorry, is there a
yeah,
good entry point?
you could just start at the beginning, which is my first book of plays called The Clean House and Other Plays, partly because it's the most economical and that you get 4 plays instead of just one.
Great answer.
As a practical matter, but I love reading plays actually, and I think they're hard to read because they're a little bit like blueprints, like an architectural blueprint. It's
Yeah.
not the same as hearing or seeing them, but I will say because I started as a poet, I always loved the bookness of a play, and I specifically write for readers. So I hope they're readerly enough that you could sit down and read it, even if you would think, oh, I hate reading plays.
That's perfect. No, I mean, you said in one point in one of your books, you were like, theater is like reading aloud, that it's a
Mhm,
kind of reading aloud to an
mhm.
audience. And speaking of your poetry, can you tell us what's coming up next for you? What the big release is?
Sure. I have a book of poems called Love Poems in Quarantine coming out in May with Copper Canyon. And I'm really excited about it because it was one of those projects where you don't realize you're writing a book until it's done. And it was in the pandemic, I was writing 1 haiku a day to mark the passage of time. And I
Yeah.
started, actually, speaking of William, I started with my son William. The first week school was canceled and there was nothing to do. I was like, let's write some haikus together. And so the first haiku we wrote together was something like, um, the stores are empty and the theaters are shuttered, but my mind is full. So that became a starting point of a year of my just marking the time with haiku. And some are funny and some are about nature, some are serious about all the racial reckonings in the country. And some are just like very domestic, like I did laundry again today, and that was enough. So anyway, I'm looking forward to it being a book.
Well, I can't wait to read it. My friend Lauren is doing some publicity work for you, so
I
I'm
love
hoping
her.
that she's
Yeah.
going to sneak me a copy soon.
Oh, good.
I just I could just ask you a million things. I just want to thank you so much for giving your time, and thank you for your work. And I just, for everyone, if you haven't read Smile yet, beautiful, beautiful memoir. And if you're a young parent, or if you're a new parent, or if your mind isn't feeling like it can digest, this is a really quick 230 or so pages, by the way. A lot of people mentioned that. But if you need a little more bite-sized things, which I believe, Sarah, you wrote most of this on the quiet car of the Amtrak.
I did.
So 100 essays I don't have time to write, I think, is going to become a contemporary classic.
Oh,
This book is, both these books are beautiful. Sarah Ruhl, get her books, read her plays, read her poetry, get ready. Is there a good way for people to like follow you or keep track of you?
I am a wee bit on Instagram and I have a website. But before I go, I just want to thank you so much for everything you do to create connections and community for people who read and people who write. It's really beautiful. And if you ever come to Brooklyn, let me know and I'll buy a cup of coffee.
I would love nothing more than to get to Brooklyn right now and see you anyway. But I will absolutely take you up on that.
Okay.
It has been my pleasure. Say hi to the kids for
Thank you.
me, and uh,
Likewise.
and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thanks.
Thank you. And